Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kirby Smart, this University of Georgia football program, land another commitment coming out of the transfer portal. And Michael Jackson III, former USC wide receiver, 3 seasons at USC, 46 catches, 498 yards, 5 touchdowns. And I think there's going to be a lot of people on Twitter in the comment sections talking about why are we taking a USC wide receiver that couldn't crack the rotation for USC the last couple of years. And I think the answer is, and the answer in my mind kind of reflects the reason why Kirby Smart has had so much success at the University of Georgia the last couple of years. Why has the Georgia football program become the blueprint of success at college football? And we've talked about this before. It's the competitive depth. Like, yes, Georgia has had star power at multiple different position groups over this kind of historic run that we've seen the Georgia Bulldogs have. But I think what makes them special, especially when you talk about peaking at the end of the season, winning the games and being the best version of your team when it matters, it's because of the depth that this team has. And I think you look at this wide receiver room and Kirby Smart has identified this as a position group that needs more talent and more depth and more competition added to this unit, right? When you lose a guy like Ladd McConkey, when you lose a guy like Brock Bowers, who I know plays tight end, but was the pass catcher to go to in this Georgia offense, I think he looked at this wide receiver room and said, we need to add more talent, more competition, more depth to this unit. And you've seen him go out in the transfer portal and do just that. Obviously, bringing in Colby Young from Miami, bringing in London Humphreys from Vanderbilt, now Michael Jackson III from USC. So you talk about a guy like Michael Jackson. One, we'll add some context around Michael Jackson, a guy that I think is much better than the numbers during his time at USC reflect. But more importantly, whether Michael Jackson becomes the leading receiver for Georgia or not, he is going to come into that room and push other players in that wide receiver room to be the best version of themselves. And I think that is why the University of Georgia has had so much success the last couple of years, because the competition to earn playing time, to just earn playing time, not just a starting spot at the University of Georgia, requires, you to play at that elite level during practice. And I think that bringing in a guy like Michael Jackson III, whether he, again, starts for Georgia, whether he's a role player or whether he doesn't play at all, elevates the wide receiver room around Michael Jackson. And again, Kirby Smart, I think, has identified this wide receiver room as being a position group that he wants to add depth and talent to. Now, I want to talk about Michael Jackson III. I want to talk about what Georgia has done in the transfer portal, but more importantly, there's another target for the University of Georgia that I want to talk about as well in the transfer portal. Before we get to it, just want to say thank you to you guys. This has been a blast for me the last couple of weeks, breaking down all these commitments coming out of the transfer portal. The amount of support you guys have shown the boys, it really does mean a lot. If you guys do enjoy the content, you enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Michael Jackson III. And watching a lot of USC football, like, you've seen Michael Jackson III flash. And I think there's 2 reasons why Michael Jackson kind of has struggled to become that guy at USC. One, the depth and talent at that USC wide receiver room was absolutely loaded the last couple of years. You think about 2 years ago when there was Jordan Addison in this room, and you think about this year with guys like Dorian Singer, true freshman Zachariah Branch, Deuce Robinson, it was a hard pass catcher room for Michael Jackson to crack and get significant playing time, but more importantly, kind of battled injuries. And when you're in a room that is as loaded as USC had with their wide receivers, when you miss practices, when you miss games, it is really hard to consistently find that playing time when you're kind of surrounded by NFL talent everywhere you look in that wide receiver room. So I think that's one of the reasons why you didn't see a ton of Michael Jackson at USC. Now, talking about Michael Jackson III, the player, one, you turn on some highlights, and there's some highlights on Michael Jackson on YouTube. I would encourage Georgia fans to check out. Super smooth route runner. This is a guy that can be a starting wide receiver at the SEC level. He knows how to create separation. He has that big physical frame. And the numbers I like to look at the most for wide receivers are how successful are quarterbacks when they're targeting you. And Michael Jackson III had 21 targets, caught 17 of them. That's an 82% completion percentage when targeted, a phenomenal number. So when the ball was thrown to Michael Jackson III, he made plays. He had 7 contested catches on only 17 catches. he's a guy that when he has the opportunity to go up and make plays, Michael Jackson normally made them for this USC program. So he's a body to me that comes into this wide receiver room and I think can elevate the people around him and potentially be a starting caliber wide receiver. And it's not like we're not used to seeing guys who are under the radar, whether they're coming in the transfer portal or high school, come into this Georgia program and do some really good things. Ladd McConkey obviously being a phenomenal example, but Dylan Bell, the true sophomore this year, was another guy that coming out of high school wasn't necessarily a guy we thought was going to come in and be a dude for this Georgia program. That's exactly what he was. And you look at what Georgia has done in the transfer portal and a conversation that we've had consistently. This is not a team that's going to go out and get 20 plus players in the portal because there's not that many guys that would make this Georgia roster better, but you've seen the positions that Kirby Smart wanted to add to. And I think that one position group that really stuck out was the wide receiver, right? Colby Young, London Humphreys, now Michael Jackson III. When you lose a guy like Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers and having some of the young guys transfer out, Kirby Smart looked at this roster and said, we need more competition and depth in this wide receiver room. And that's exactly what he's done. Now, make no mistake about it, Kirby Smart still builds this roster through the high school ranks, right? A historic class in 2024 coming in. But you're seeing Kirby Smart use the transfer portal to kind of supplement some of the holes that might have emerged in this roster. You're not going to hit on every single high school recruit across the board. And there will be some position groups that even though you brought in 2 5-stars, 2 4-stars into that room, maybe they don't pay off or maybe they don't play out the right way. And so you can use the transfer portal to supplement that. And I think that wide receiver room might have been one of those position groups that maybe they've missed on a few recruits in former high school recruiting classes. So you look at that Georgia wide receiver room and potentially love it. Ra Thomas coming back. And this move might signify that maybe one of those two or both of them might not be with this program, whether the NFL draft, whether the transfer portal. But I think regardless of the way you look at it, you're feeling good about where this wide receiver room is because you have a guy in Colby Young who I think has the athleticism and the physical tool set to really be a stud boundary receiver. And we haven't seen Georgia have that stud boundary receiver since George Pickens. And obviously kind of struggled to stay healthy, George Pickens, but is extremely talented player. You have a guy in London Humphreys who I think is coming in to play that Arian Smith role in terms of vertical threat, a lot of speed. And now you have kind of a complete wide receiver in Michael Jackson III who can just create separation and get open. You look at this wide receiver and you talk about a guy like Dylan Bell, who we're all very excited about in 2024. You're feeling pretty good about where Georgia is at in that wide receiver room. Now, the last guy I want to talk about real quick, and a name that I think should be on Georgia's radar, is defensive lineman Elijah Alston in the transfer portal coming from Marshall, a guy with an 18% pass rush win rate, had 6.5 sacks, 11.5 TFLs for Marshall last year. Not only an elite pass rusher with those numbers at almost 20% pass rush win rate, but a guy that has over 20 run stops during that 2023 season for Marshall. And I mean, that's what Georgia relies on that defensive line. Not only guys that get after the passer, but guys that can hold up in the run game. You talk about the Nolan Smiths. Like, why were they so good for Georgia? Yes, they could pin their ears back and get after the passer, but they were also hammers against the run. And a guy like Elijah Alston kind of is that guy. And I think Kirby Smart identified that defensive line as potentially being a position group that he wants to get back to dominating the line of scrimmage and having those defenses, especially on that line of scrimmage, that smother opponents. And I think Elijah Alston would certainly add to that defensive line group for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2024. And at the end of the day, like, Georgia carries the biggest stick in terms of recruiting defensive linemen. You want to go to the NFL and you're a defensive lineman, you go to Athens, Georgia. So we'll see how that one plays out. I wanted to hop on, talk about Michael Jackson, because, again, you'll see people in the comment section and on Twitter write this one off. I think this signifies why Kirby Smart's had so much success. For Georgia fans, obviously we're trusting the process, but more importantly, I think this signifies why Kirby Smart has had so much success with this program. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys, checking it out. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.